This is the Litigator's Edge podcast with your host, Aniket Sawant.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of The Litigator's Edge, a podcast where innovative attorneys reveal the strategies that have transformed their legal practice. My name is Aniket Sawant, and I'm co-founder and CEO of Threadio. It's my pleasure to have Daniel Fisher on the show today. Daniel is an attorney with Howie, Sachs & Henry, a leading injury law firm in the Toronto, Canada area. This makes Daniel our first international guest on the show, which is awesome. Daniel, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I'd like to start, Daniel, by asking you to share either a fun fact or a cringe joke. Which will it be?
I think all my jokes would be cringe anyway, so I think a fun fact would be nice.
Go for it.
Well, it's funny, I've been trying to get involved in more media and such, and doing this podcast is nice for me to do. But I was actually involved in a documentary that my firm was involved in. One of my partners at the firm, Melissa Miller, she's very involved in elder law. And she has a documentary that I believe is now playing on Prime Video about her elder law practice. And I am in it for about maybe 12 seconds. And it's supposed to be me in a meeting. And they told me to come late to the meeting for like dramatic effect. So I come late to the meeting, it's recorded and everything. And then this was played at Hot Doc Cinema, which is a well-known theater in Toronto. And everyone afterwards came up to me and said, well, you couldn't be on time for the one time you're on screen. And I had to go and say, this was planned.
It was part of the plan.
They asked me to be late.
So,
unfortunately, my one moment of fame blew up in my face. So hopefully this one doesn't, but I guess we'll find out.
That's awesome. I'm sure there'll be many, many more to come.
Yes.
Daniel, in the lead up to this podcast, when we had a conversation, one of the things you mentioned was that you really wanted to change the perception of attorneys through your work. Can you please talk a little bit through that?
Yeah, for sure. So, I'm a personal injury lawyer in Toronto, and personal injury lawyers have a bit of a reputation, and not the greatest one in the world, unfortunately. And whether or not that's earned by the practices of some or not, my firm and many lawyers I know, are trying to change it. Do not practice in the way that would earn such a reputation. I hold myself personally, and I know everyone in my firm holds themselves to the highest ethical standards. And really what we're doing is trying to help people in a time of need. Someone comes to me, usually at the worst moment of their life, having suffered a motor vehicle accident or slip and fall, or as I was just saying earlier, their loved one's been abused or neglected in a nursing home, and they come to me for help. And I take that very seriously. Everyone at my firm takes that very seriously. And, I'm very upfront with how I approach things, and I tell them what to expect. And I believe, and I think my clients can attest to this, that I deliver on what I tell them. So, personal injury lawyers can get a bit of a bad rep, and the laws are a bit different in the States. Things are a little more flexible in the States than they are here, which allows perhaps for a little more malfeasance than you would see in Canada. But overall, I think it's like any job. There are good cops, there are bad cops, there are good doctors, bad doctors, good lawyers, bad lawyers, right? And I and everyone at my firm tries to be the good lawyers who are there to help people because they need it.
That's wonderful. And in movies that we used to watch as kids and so forth, the good guys are often superheroes, which is a perfect segue to my next question, which is, I think of every attorney who joins me on this podcast as a superhero. And so every superhero has an origin story. What's yours?
An origin story. That's a good one. Well, I'll talk about my origin story to get into personal injury. I went to undergrad. I ended up doing neuroscience for my undergrad, psychology with a specialty in neuroscience. And I learned about the brain. I learned about, the biological underpinnings of everything. And, just to give you some context here, I was horrible in sciences leading up to this. But I went into undergrad, wanted to do philosophy and that more airy-fairy stuff. And I didn't like that. I needed something more to grab onto, something more solid. So I found my way into the psych with the neuroscience specialty. I ended up working at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto, which is one of the leading mental health institutions, I think, possibly in the entire world. I did drug addiction research there, and I really liked it. And I was debating between doing my PhD or segueing into something else. And, I I like the idea of helping people using my neuroscience background in perhaps a more concrete way. What I was doing in in um, in my research was helpful, but it was what we call more basic research. It wasn't clinical research. I was working with animals. I was doing animal studies, these sorts of things, and I didn't. It was hard to see how it translated really into helping a person. So I decided to shift to law. My father's a lawyer too, so I had some experience with that. And personal injury was my target from the very beginning because it was the area of law that allowed me to combine my medical knowledge and law, and it's worked out.
That's fascinating. Can we dig a little deeper into that? So, how has your knowledge that you've gained through psychology, through neuroscience, helped you specifically in matters that you've dealt with?
Yeah, so I'd say to help more early on. I'd say now it probably doesn't have as much of an impact as it did earlier in my career. Early on, it helped because it just gave me some context for the medical stuff I was reading. My job requires me to dig into medical records all the time.
Right.
I'm reading medical records on a daily basis, usually multiple times a day. And I deal a lot with brain injuries, usually, varying between more commonly mild traumatic brain injuries, post-concussion syndrome, but more rarely, though more seriously, oftentimes, the more severe brain injuries where people have, either structural damage to the brain, midline shifts, whatever it may be, right? So it helped me interpret those as a younger lawyer easier. One area I would say about being in just the sciences generally, not necessarily neuroscience, that I think really helped in law school and continues to help is the ability to synthesize. When you're writing, I was a co-author on a couple of papers, and I wrote a thesis back in my schooling. And when you're doing that, you have to synthesize these vast amounts of literature. You have to do the literature review at the start of your analysis. At least for my thesis, I did. And you're taking these extremely convoluted, extremely complicated studies and synthesizing them into one or two lines, right? So being able to learn how to do that effectively really helped in law school, and I think really helped in what I do as a lawyer because I really just instinctively cut to the point. I don't think people think of me as particularly flowery with my language. I just get to the point. And I think it's good to do that, and I think it's good advocacy, which is ultimately what it's all about.
That's great. Yeah, it sounds like the grounding in sort of the hard sciences really helps with that as well. So which is awesome. Um, cool. So if we now shift gears to specific matters that you've dealt with in your career. So what's a case or matter that has fundamentally sort of changed how you approach litigation? Maybe you had a certain viewpoint coming in at the start of your career, and maybe that viewpoint has changed because of a certain matter. What would be an example of that?
I would say, this might be different than the American system views it, but people come to me with a problem, and my goal is to solve their problem. My goal is to not create more problems for them. And sometimes lawyers take that uh, either, I would assume, accidentally, create more problems for their clients. Not in the area of law I do, but the classic situation of a family law lawyer who's a pit bull who, you know, tries to get everything, squeeze as much out of the former spouse as they can, and it creates, years of litigation and untold amounts of stress. That kind of example. So for me, I try to, someone comes to me and I try to resolve their problem. I try to take their legal matter and the stress that comes with that and put it on me. They have enough to deal with. They're dealing with an injury or an injury to a loved one or the death of a loved one, God forbid. So I'm trying to take that stress off of them and handle it. That doesn't mean I'm not going to fight tooth and nail for them. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to push the other side as hard as possible. It doesn't mean I'm not going to take it all the way to a trial if need be. Of course I will. But, the goal of what I do is to try to get a fair resolution under our law for my client and for me to relieve as much stress as I can in the process and allow them to focus on what matters, which is recovering from their injury.
That's wonderful. That's pretty far-sighted if I take a step back, because it's like you're not just dealing with the matter itself, but you're also dealing with the impact that the matter is having on the client and the future impacts it might have on the client, which is a really great perspective. Thank you for sharing that.
To build off that point, I mean, personal injury lawyers do a lot more than just handle a legal case, right? We play therapist, you know, guide treatment, right? I just had a conversation with a client today where I said to them, you know what, you really need an occupational therapist involved here because they're struggling. They injured one of their arms pretty badly and they're struggling. So I'm coordinating the OT treatment. I'm getting an OT involved. I'm going to get them help. I'm the treatment quarterback. Um, and I step in when my clients are struggling. I'm a personal injury lawyer. I've gone to eviction hearings. I've argued to prevent my client from being evicted. That's not part of my job. I'm not retained to do that, but I do it because it matters, because my client's well-being matters, right? I've done an intervention for one of my clients where she was addicted to drugs and she hadn't really not much family to help. Me and another lawyer hired an interventionist, went to her house and had an intervention with her. And she was paralyzed. I physically loaded her into a car to drive her to therapy. Right. One of my one of my clients was suicidal. I met him and walked with him to CAMH. You know, this is what I do. This is what people in my firm do. This is what, personal injury lawyers who care do because we care about the person's health. We want them to be the best that they can be in the circumstances. And a lot of times, unfortunately, what comes with an injury is a destruction of the person's personal life. Everything falls apart around them. And we're oftentimes the only people who are there who can support them.
That's incredible. That's truly an example of going above and beyond, and I think that's really a great lesson for our audience. Thanks for sharing that. Um, Daniel, you've written quite a few thought leadership pieces for your firm, and you have speaking and teaching engagements as well. I'm sure that adds quite a bit to your schedule. So, two-part question on that. One is, what are some key takeaways that you like to leave audiences with as you reach them through these channels? And number two, how do you make time and balance it all?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with the first one. How do I make time? Look, it's busy. I'm not going to lie, but as my boss and mentor Adam Wagman says, that's the job. We're we're not in a 9 to 5 job. We just aren't.
Yeah.
I didn't come into this job thinking that I was going to work 9 to 5, clock in, clock out, and that's the end of the story. You know, Client calls me on a Sunday, I'm answering. You know, if I'm on vacation and I need to hop on a phone call, I will. That doesn't mean that I don't have a personal life. Of course I do, but it just comes with the territory. You just have to accept it, right? And there's a rewarding element of that, knowing that your clients know that they can rely on you when you need them. Look, you need to maintain some level of professional boundary. If I'm on vacation, I'm not sitting there working 12 hours. But if someone needs me for 10 minutes and I'm on a vacation or on a weekend, I need to hop on a call or finish an assignment or whatever it is every now and again. That's just the name of the game. Don't be a lawyer if you don't want to do that. And in terms of what I want to try to leave people with in terms of my thought leadership, I mean, look, it depends on what I'm thought leadering about. But
Okay.
uh, for our conversation, I want people to understand that lawyers are not these scary people who are out to rip you off, right? Just like I said at the start, there are bad people in everything. There are good people in everything. The good lawyers are there to help you. The good lawyers should explain to you the process so you understand what's happening and why it's happening. Um, the good lawyer should be honest with you. So that's not a surprise when something happens. I am honest, perhaps to a fault, up front. The clients will call me and they oftentimes want things that I can't deliver, especially in my nursing home cases where I'm dealing with people who have been abused in nursing homes. People will call me and want justice. They will want to punish the nursing home. I can provide justice to an extent. I can provide the sense of justice knowing that a nursing home and an insurance company behind them has paid you money, but I'm not the government. I can't create criminal charges, right? So, you know, part of what I do is giving that honesty up front so people have fair expectations so that they don't at the end, that they're not shocked or think that something bad has happened or think that something I've done something nefarious. That people understand Daniel is going to provide me this. He has told me from the very start. He continues to update me. He tells me the truths, the good, the bad, and the ugly of my case. And when things ultimately resolve, albeit a trial or a settlement, they feel fully confident that I've told them from the very beginning my thoughts and been honest with them.
That's wonderful. Switching gears a little bit to the use of technology in your practice, and I guess, technology in the context of litigation strategies that you employ. So maybe we'll start with the question that's at the cusp of those two. What's an unconventional litigation strategy you've employed maybe using technology, maybe not, that gave you a competitive edge in a matter?
Well, I mean, I think it's becoming increasingly conventional. It's the obvious one. It's AI.
Sure.
Perhaps it depends on who you're talking to. But our firm, and I'm on my firm technology committee. It's me and two other lawyers and a couple of law clerks and a couple of assistants who are working on trying to modernize the firm's systems and specifically worked on AI. And we implemented an AI solution that it's quite interesting. You upload your case data and it creates essentially a timeline, searchable timeline. But most impressive, I think, is it creates a chat bot that you can chat with, like a chat GPT chat bot, essentially. It's not chat GPT, but similar.
Right.
You ask a question about your case and it answers it with citations. So that's pretty cool and pretty helpful. It helps a lot in mediations, for example, pre-trials, where the defense lawyer may raise something, then I'm like, that doesn't sound right. And I put it in the AI and it'll tell me whether or not it's right. It also helps with drafting documents. Helps with trial prep because I have a timeline that I can reference. Ultimately, what I do is tell a story. I'm a storyteller. That's what I tell people. My job is to take the facts, synthesize it, and tell a story based grounded in the facts that advocates for my client's position. And how do you tell a story? Well, with a story, you have to have a protagonist, you have to have an antagonist, you have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if all your documents are jumbled in a mess, how are you supposed to tell that story? So having an AI that can do that quite easily really helps in my ability to be that storyteller that I need to be.
That makes a lot of sense, Daniel. It's great to hear that you're on your firm has an AI committee and that you're on it. So when you're on that committee, couple of questions. How do you and the committee evaluate which new technologies or approaches are worth implementing? Number one. And number two is after you make that recommendation, what resistance do you typically, if at all, encounter, and how do you overcome that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of making the determination, it's, obviously there's internal metrics, costs, and, cost to train everyone, cost of the software itself. How do we make the decision? I just try to stay on top of things, sort of the two other lawyers in the committee and the other staff. If there's a talk on new emerging trends in AI and law, I'll attend it, right? I try to just stay tuned in, so to speak, on AI news. I'm on Reddit a fair amount. I go on the AI subreddits a lot and read about it, see if there's anything interesting. I'll just research things, nothing too fancy. But I mean, in terms of the uptake, it's like anything. Some people are gonna like it, some people aren't, some people might resist, some people won't. It's about trying to show use examples, doing it on my own files, having the other lawyers I work with doing it on their files, sending around to the firm, hey, the program did this. What would usually take us 12 hours took me 2. You should maybe consider this. But at the end of the day, if other people don't want to use it, they don't want to use it. My firm kind of works in teams. So we have about 6 or so teams, maybe, perhaps a little more. And each team does things slightly differently. So my team uses the AI. I know other teams do, and it might vary between teams, but it's really up to personal preference. I'm not going around holding a gun to anyone's head saying you have to use it. It's their own decision. If it works with the way they work, then great. If it doesn't, then that's their prerogative.
Makes sense. Um, Using sort of your litigator's hat, where do you see the biggest opportunities for where innovation could drive even more value in litigation over the next few years? What are some big sort of unsolved problems that you are like, you know what, I really hope that something happens, something good happens here in this space or that.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what I do, and I think LexisNexis has this, I think, um, is AI built into the legal research databases so that I could have a chat bot and ask and say, hey, I have this legal research question, search all the case law and do it. Um, that'd be super helpful because that case law is up to date. And if it had the ability to reason in the legal sense, provide an analysis, that would be uh, that'd be really helpful. In terms of other areas, I'm personally just looking for a product, and perhaps you would know because you might be more in tune than I am, a product that just takes medical records and puts them in order and delivers it in one document, like a book. Like a lot of these things provide summaries, which is great, but sometimes some of the details can be missed, some of the minutia that might be important. So when I'm preparing for a trial, going back to the storytelling, I will spend days, which has been cut down now because of the AI, but still days, literally ordering every medical record in sequential order and then putting it in one document, printing that document off and reading it like a book. It's a story of my client's life, story of my client's medical treatment. So I can tell the story, right? That's a personal preference. I don't think anyone else does that, but that's me. And I've been on the hunt for an AI that would just do that for me. Uh, haven't found one yet, but maybe someone on this will hear this podcast and message me.
That sounds great. As we wrap up, Daniel, here, it's been great speaking with you. What are some resources that you'd recommend, resources or ways of thinking, I should say, that you'd recommend to litigators who are looking to gain an edge in today's legal environment?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, what I would say is, I guess it would be geared towards younger lawyers.
Right.
Um, the greatest advantage I think you can give yourself is to just make connections with people, take opportunities, be a yes man or woman. And when someone comes to you with an opportunity, and I'm using opportunity in a very flexible way. If someone wants to grab lunch with you, someone wants to grab a coffee, you know, do it. Be a yes man, be a yes woman, offer your time to others and it will come back to you in multiples, right? For law students, I tell them all the time, obviously studying is important, but arguably just as important is being social with your class, right? Being friendly with everyone because it's connections are important. These are people who can send you files in the future. These are people who you can rely on. And if you're having trouble with something or need guidance, or maybe you want to move jobs and you want to get a peek into another area, or maybe they can hook you up with another job, whatever it may be. So I think the greatest advantage that you can give yourself as a litigator is to take your nose out of the book a little bit and do, you know, get out there. Like just yesterday, I organized an event at my firm. I had about 50 other lawyers attend. Um, I served smoked meat sandwiches. I had a bartender and we all hung out, had a laugh, and that was it. And it's those sorts of events that obviously it's nice to do as to be a community builder amongst other lawyers. But what's good for me, obviously, to get my name out there and make connections where I can provide benefit to these people in the future, and I might get benefit from them in the future if I need help or guidance or something.
That's fantastic. Yeah, making connections, building community, that's timeless advice. So thanks for that, Daniel. Final question. Is there a question that I should have asked you, but I didn't?
That's a good one. Uh, I wouldn't say any particular question. I think you've done a good job. I mean, we talked about this in the pre-meeting, and I think when we were just chatting about how we were gonna approach today, and I think I think it's important to talk about because, you know, the event I held yesterday was about civility between lawyers. Um, and, you know, when I approach reaching out to clients or other lawyers, whoever it may be, you know, going back to my boss again and mentor Adam Wagman, he has something called the Globe and Mail test. And the Globe and Mail test is, well, for those who don't know, the Globe and Mail is I think the largest newspaper in Canada. And what Adam says is never write something that you wouldn't be okay if it was printed on the front page of the Globe and Mail. And I take that with what I do. I take that with what I say to people. I take that with, you know, with emails and correspondence I send. If I'm angry, which I'm a pretty even-keeled guy, but sometimes I, you know, like anyone, you can get frustrated or pissed off with another lawyer. I take a breather and I do not write anything or, God forbid, send anything until I look at it and I say, all right, if this somehow ended up on the front page of the Globe and Mail, I'd be fine. I wouldn't look bad. Nobody would get up in arms. So I think that's important. I think that's something that litigators should take with them, really any lawyers or really any professional, is to, you know, remember that it might feel personal, but it's usually not, at least not for you. And your job is to not create problems, but to resolve them, to take a breather, focus on what is important, which is moving the case forward and trying to get a fair resolution under our law for your client. And if what you're about to do is going to harm that, don't. Take a step back, breathe, and wait.
Wonderful. On that note, I'd like to say, Daniel, it was a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for all the insights, the advice, and your time. I'm sure our audience is going to love this episode. So thank you again so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Litigator's Edge podcast, brought to you by Threadio.